33. Interlude, Part 2, Calculations. Author's note. Here is the second and final part of the interlude, covering the Muggle wizard government responses to the proof website. I'm currently writing the next full-length chapter and hope to have some time to write between corn and soybean harvests so I can finish it up and get it out to everyone. Looking at the first week of November if things go well. Much thanks to GJ Mega and JDH41 once again for doing a wonderful job checking this chapter over for grammar and content. Also many thanks to Costin for help on Muggle politics and strategy on both parts of this interlude, without whom it would never be as concise as it is. The general who wins a battle makes many calculations in his temple ere the battle is fought. The general who loses a battle makes but few calculations beforehand. Thus do many calculations lead to victory, and few calculations to defeat. How much more no calculation at all? It is by attention to this point that I can foresee who is likely to win or lose. Sun Tzu. The art of war. There were few in the Oriental Ministry of Magic who knew the whole truth, but many who knew a part of it. Zhang Min knew it all, because her family had been there throughout it all, every secret skirmish, every political barb. Her ancestor had welcomed the European traders when they first discovered the Asian continent and its riches, their magical counterparts eager for trade in unique potion ingredients and specimens. His son had helped set up the first international means of travel, and his son in turn had helped wipe the memories of their former friends and colleagues who preferred to serve the Muggle emperors than adhere to the new global statute of secrecy. She had heard the stories. How the majority of Chinese witches and wizards, Shushi, did not want to follow Western ideals of being separate from the Muggles, how they enjoyed the status and freedom of being court magicians and sorcerers. Tradition and family loyalty was strong, as was honor. But the Oriental Ministry of Magic was formed on the bones of the honorable in the name of power and control. Those who fought beside the European ministries gained control. Those who did not perished or fled into obscurity. In the first week of his rule, the first Oriental minister gained power over nearly half the world's magical populace, a feat he had striven towards for decades. There would be no more bowing to Muggles, no more Chinese emperor. For a century it had worked. But while the Shushi stayed the same, confident and sure, the Muggles changed. There was no more Muggle emperor. There was no more pressure to protect their secret. The Chinese were weak in the eyes of those who possessed magic, and Jiang Min's grandfather, the minister in the 1940s, relaxed his tight grip. No longer did they search for dissenters. No longer did they focus so keenly on the remaining magical families who hated the ministry and what it stood for. Their attention turned instead to India and the disruption on the European continent, sending forces to help their allies defend the statute from the Dark Lord Grindelwald. For 50 years, the Oriental Ministry of Magic held sway with an iron fist, but the government did not increase in strength, and in their arrogance, in their pride, his grandfathers did not see that the Muggles continued to change. There were magical families who had been waiting for the chance. Families who, like the Mins, passed down their own stories through the generations, who hid in warded temples in the mountains, sheltered among monks, and in elaborate scrolls wrote the truth. And these scrolls they hid among the Muggle libraries, inside closed vaults and secured houses, waiting for them to be found, waiting for the time of honor to hold sway again. The Chinese Muggles made a new government, and it was strong. Its hand was heavy, its presence felt keenly. And then the scrolls were found, and the instructions followed, and the secret revealed, the truth and the injustice and the strength that was stolen from them. Jiang Min knew the story. She knew it because her father had been among the Jifa when they were called out for a routine memory sweep. A Muggle had been asking questions. A Muggle had been talking of wizards and witches. A Muggle had infiltrated their places of commerce. It was routine. It was supposed to be simple, but it wasn't just any Muggle. The Oriental Ministry had lost its touch on the pulse of governments, on their changing tides and currents. It did not inform their respective governments of their presence, as was Western precedent. They looked down upon the Muggles, hated them for the power they had wielded in the past. They reveled in the chance to once more prove their superiority, even if the only ones who would know of it were themselves. They never saw the trap for what it was. When Wang Min apparated into the concrete building with two of his men for a complete sweep of the Muggle dwelling, they were not met with the family of three they expected. They were met with Muggle weapons, and behind them all stood their target, Mao Zedong, the chairman of the Communist Party of China. They were given a warning only. Honor extended as a gift, the bow before the duel. But the Oriental Ministry of Magic had not been formed with honor, but brute strength. The wizards took the warning as an opportunity, and with ruthless confidence lifted wands in rebellion and scorn. After Zhang Min's father returned, the only man of three men, wounded, bleeding. He was the messenger, and the message was final. The Oriental Ministry of Magic was no longer welcome in China. The governing and control of those present within its borders was now the responsibility of the true government, as it should have been all along. The minister was furious. Within hours, forces were assembled, a plan of attack made. They expected to fight Muggles, expected to use shields to easily block return fire, to cast spells from afar to eradicate the insult. But those Shushi that had hidden in rebellion had been waiting, and it was not Muggles alone they faced. Around the homes of every government official wards had been placed, and around the chairman a force of a dozen wizards, not wearing robes but elegant Muggle dress, ready to do battle as they had trained, as their fathers and grandfathers had trained. Wang Min, freshly healed and ready for a fight, had cast the first spell. Her mother told this with tears of pride. He had been brave, her father, strong. And then he had died, and not to the spells of the rebels, but to the sniper fire of the cowardly Muggles who waited atop the buildings nearby. Wizards cast spells. They understood fighting with space in between them and an enemy. But they did not then know the true potential of long-distance warfare, of the quickly gathered wizards sworn to squash the rebellion, unused to such combat, overconfident and angry. Only a meager third returned to the ministry. They also had a message, one learned and not told. Together, those with magic and those without could conquer them all. Zhang Min had grown up in a world no longer certain of its place. On the outside, to the Iqua, to their western neighbors, to much of their own people, they portrayed complete confidence and strength. The other ministries could not be told of their failure, could not be told that China was no longer wholly safe, but under siege, could not be told that they had failed. 3 times since the day her father died, they had tried to overthrow the rebels. But the wizards who worked for the Muggles had been thorough. They protected each government site from outright wizardry, had gathered numbers to them, had been ready from the minute the cue was given to strike and hold firm. And the Muggles who worked with them did not fear magic or its potential. They used it instead, ruthlessly, in ways the ministry had never seen. And so it was that, when rumors began of Western ministries seeing dissension in their ranks, speaking whispers of Muggle rebellion and discovery, the Oriental Ministry of Magic was the only body of government who truly understood, who truly knew the capabilities of Muggles, who knew their technology and its horrible impact, who knew failure at the hands of those supposed to be lesser than them. They were the only ones ready for war. Zhang Min, the minister of the Oriental Ministry of Magic, a powerful witch in her own right, was ready to finally gain her revenge. There was a reason Vladimir Putin placed such a great deal of importance on Russia's intelligence agencies. Information was power. The more one had, the better one was prepared for the opponent's moves, the more one could anticipate exactly what needed to be done and how. Without this knowledge, a nation's enemies would swarm around like flies, nibbling away at it piece by minuscule piece until nothing but a skeletal corpse remained. And so he was furious when he learned of the hound's existence not from his various agents, but by himself, scrolling through popular Western media late at night, keeping a finger on the pulse of the world. He had seen dragons, he had seen newscasters scoff and analysts perplexed. And he had called an emergency National Security Council meeting. There had been no angry tirade. He had not raised his voice or called on any particular name. He had appeared as he generally did, cold, detached, calm. His message had been clear. You have failed the Kremlin, and now you are going to make up for that failure, or someone else will do so in your place. Putin did not generally intimidate his lieutenants. He preferred to calmly balance the factions in Russia against one another, from the armed services and the intelligence agencies, down to the media and the general population. He was respected, loved, by those who worked with him and those who lived under him for both his restraint and his strength. But he had had plans for the revealing of the wizarding world. Delicate plans, ones that had been evolving for years, carefully prepared and executed, a masterpiece of manipulation and strategy. That it was all in jeopardy caused his carefully crafted temperament to fray. He gave his orders. He contacted the state media on the official spin the story was to be given. And then he went to bed because there were more issues, more potential crises to be dealt with. Within a week, he had been given a list of every known hound in Russia and all their sympathizers who had infiltrated the Kremlin. The sympathizers were dealt with quickly. Half were simply removed from their posts, the others placed under surveillance. Director Bortnikov of the Federal State Security ordered select FSB agents to infiltrate the ranks of the hounds themselves, but it had yielded little information. The Russian branch of the hounds was a very small fish in a large pond. They knew little about the plans of the organization at large, besides what little their Western partners had deigned to share with them. He needed more information if action was to be taken. Director Bortnikov suggested it was the GRU's turn to act and capture a British hound from London. Director Igor Sergan disagreed. While the main intelligence directorate could easily find one of the hounds abroad, the capture of any British citizen would bring the hammer down on all their agents. Britain would not allow one of their own to be handled in such a way by Russia, regardless of their ties to what was essentially an extremist group. Putin listened to the two men and then provided an alternative to which both could agree. They would capture a hound with the unique help of magic and return them in the same manner, no trace of the kidnapping, no memory left of the encounter. Putin only had to convince the Russian Ministry of Magic of the necessity. He had known of the wizards for nearly 15 years. He had discovered them when Yeltsin had appointed him the head of the FSB. That knowledge had been like finding the final piece of an incomplete puzzle, the picture entire made clear with its placement. They had been condescending, if not outright hostile. Their history with the government of Russia, one fraught with bad blood and battle. The Russian Ministry of Magic was one of the oldest in the world. It had been formed as the Mongol Empire had collapsed against the Grand Duchy of Moscow, wizards and witches drawing together to form a strong coalition of their own. The Mongols had created a society based on meritocracy, of religious freedom and respect, where any man could reach any rank if he was capable enough. The Grand Duchy sought to undo that, to bring Western concepts of nobility among the wizards, to make blood matter more than merit. The Mongolian wizards chose to hide instead of accepting such, creating first the Mongolian ministry, then later the Russian ministry, as the Russian Empire rose to power and people began to identify as Russians. They controlled not only modern Russia, but also Mongolia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, the Baltics, most of Ukraine, with the exception of the West, along with all the rest of the territory that had encompassed the Russian Empire and later the Soviet Union. In time, the Russian ministry had become one of the integral forces of the Iqua and the strongest supporter of the Statute of Secrecy, seeking to protect themselves from the changing ideals and turmoil of the muggles around them. But Stalin had learned of their existence late in his life and disliked their independence from his own control. He had sought to conquer them, instigating attacks upon known magical settlements across the Soviet Union. But Stalin was old and had many enemies. What success he had through military might only rile the wizards to enter into a deal with muggles for the first time since their founding. The Russian Ministry of Magic in secret met with Khrushchev and agreed to assassinate Stalin in exchange for their own political independence. Khrushchev and all the other leaders of the Soviet Union kept to that deal. For a few years, fragile peace reigned once more. But then the Soviet Union fell apart, and the wizards did not escape unscathed. The same problems that plagued the Muggle world infiltrated the magical one. Slowly, at first, through the influence of Muggle-borns, and then more quickly as economies of countries within the ministry collapsed. Putin had witnessed it. From the wizard assigned to himself, as the contact between their governments, he learned that the Ukrainian wizards were near revolt. The Baltics demanded autonomy, and the Mongolian wizards were threatening to join the Oriental Ministry. And Putin saw that if the Russian Ministry of Magic splintered as well, He would lose any chance of using them as an ally to bring about his own image of a large Russian empire. He needed their wide reach. He needed them to maintain their control of the countries that had split from Russia. And so he made his plans and approached the wizards himself with an offer of advice and eventual military help to hold themselves together as the Soviet Union had been unable to do. It was a strategy that spanned years. Putin made further contacts in the wizarding world. He met ministers and their families, political heads of magical departments, even celebrities of their world. At one point, the struggle almost descended into magical war, and it was then that Putin offered muggle weapons and tactics, finally in the position himself as president to give it. The Russian Ministry of Magic owed its continued existence to Russia, to Vladimir Putin, a fact for which they were extremely grateful. For Putin, it was the perfect time to do what Stalin himself had failed to gain control of the ministry, to bring the wizards to heel under the Kremlin. And he was doing so with careful manipulation, without risking open conflict. Now, he almost had full control of the ministry. Every department head was appointed on his advice, and the current Russian Minister of Magic was his own personal choice, a man loyal to the one who had helped him achieve his position. A few more years, and he would have been ready to break the word of the wizard's existence to the world himself, along with the Chinese, ready to stretch out their hands and take what had been lost, extending their control over countries that had once been theirs with the wizard's military strength at their side, while other great powers struggled to cope with their democratic citizens, who would doubtless riot and shift blame and fear. The hounds were too early, before he was quite ready for word to escape. But Putin knew how to adapt. He knew how to manipulate the situation back into his favor. He could use these hounds just as he planned to use the Russian ministry to his own ends. So now, with the help of the Ministry of Magic, he would set new plans in motion. Agent Dmitry Rostov leaned against the rough trunk of a skeletal maple, its leaves lost to the winter in the air. His eyes scanned the empty street, only dim light falling from the one lamppost whose bulb had not burned out long ago. It was a cold night, even for Moscow in early November. The forecast had called for freezing weather, and Rostov had come prepared for a long, bitter night of waiting. His directive was simple: come to this street, this alley, this tree. Then wait for them. He had met them before, many times just like this. The first, years ago, during a closed-door meeting with the director of his department. Rostov, whose name had not been Rostov at that time, had been chosen from among his rising peers of the Federal Security Service as one who could keep his silence, had a clear head, and most of all, showed extreme dedication. Rostov hadn't understood then. He had been a young man, loyal, unwavering. One of them had been there in that office, seated. Rostov had been told to sit as well. And then the blue eyes of the director met his, and he was told in a calm voice that they were different, they were among us, they were real. He had not believed. He had thought it a hoax. But then the oddly dressed man had risen and lifted a stick and cast a spell. Rostov had believed then. He had sworn his new oath, not to the FSB, not to the Federation. He had sworn, a thin slice across his palm, the robed figure's wand held towards him, to keep their existence secret and safe, and to always act in the best interests of Director Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin. And Rostov began to live many lives. He was a model citizen. He obeyed the law and paid his taxes. He attended church, a nice if quiet man. He was an agent for the FSB, working a desk occasionally, assigned at times for field work. Known as a good man, steady, reliable. But under them all, he worked for someone far more powerful. Rostov had sworn what seemed to be an ordinary oath, if perhaps more ceremonial than he was used to. But he found that the scar upon his palm ached, at times, like a foreign thing lived inside it, watching him, always measuring his intentions. It woke him in the night during dreams of them. It shot pins and needles up his arm if he even considered turning aside from his assignments. Rostov was not an unintelligent man. He knew that they had cast some spell upon him, and the director had known, had commanded it, had watched it be done. He did not regret it. He had no time for regrets. Rostov lived his many roles, and when given his more secretive assignments, followed through with expert precision. And he lived well, very, very well. He stamped a foot in reaction against the cold night air, the only restless motion he had made as the hours passed by. Was beginning to feel the onset of age, especially on nights like these. Grey had begun to creep upon his brown hair, the shadows of wrinkles at the corner of his mouth. But he waited without complaint, even inside his mind, because at any moment they would arrive. The time was not set, only that it would be dark, and here. Rostov knew both much and little about them. They had always been around, and they were all around him even now. They lived, invisible and silent, in nearly every city across the country. At some point, during the Cold War, their existence had come to light. The government of the time, under Stalin, had attempted to take control of them with subterfuge and force. It had failed, and they had sent a message: "Leave us alone, and we will leave you alone." Stalin had not listened, and Rostov could only guess what their retaliation had been. Perhaps it was no coincidence that Stalin's death had followed the last attack upon one of their communities. Whatever had happened, no further contact had been made until the Soviet Union had collapsed, and new powers began to rise as old ones died. Rostov only knew that at some point, of all the agents who worked within Russia, one had rediscovered them and approached them, and now Rostov worked for that man above all others. And they worked with President Putin as well. He did not know what the letters and packages were that he delivered. He knew that there were pieces of his memory gone, open gaps of time and seasons, and places that he could no longer recall, no longer dwell upon. He knew that each time he forgot, he also gained something, sometimes minute, others grand. A new dacha once, another time a promotion, a better office. He knew that each time he learned something new, he lost something old. Rostov never questioned why they would work with the president. An idle moment might be spent contemplating it. Why they respected Putin, why they, if they could so easily stall Stalin's efforts, would deign to work with any government of Russia again. But if he thought too deeply on it, his palm would begin to ache, and so Rostov learned it was not worth the trouble. As far as Rostov knew, he was the only one who worked in such a capacity, a go-between for the president and them. But he didn't expect he would know if there were others. He had no reason to. Only in the last few days, his commands to retrieve and deliver messages had increased tenfold. Suddenly, with a sound like a fired pistol, a robed figure appeared in the dim street. Rostov did not flinch, though his alert dark eyes flicked around and across the alley, observing, sweeping for threats. But he knew that sound already. Something like that of a Makarov or a Dragunov, and yet to his trained ears not quite either. It was displaced air. It was something appearing where something was not before. It was a man. It usually was. He had seen a woman only a handful of times before. His ceremonial scarlet robes gleamed with golden thread, a mockery in the dusty concrete street. His features were hidden in shadow, a hood drawn over his face. The robed man stepped towards him with casual grace. Rostov stepped away to meet him, his body becoming tight, preparing for it, preparing for the worst part of any encounter with them. And from the shadowed hood, he caught the gleam of piercing blue eyes, powerful, mesmerizing. And they were in his mind, fragments of memory blurring across his vision, and his palm burned and his hands spasmed. Another mind within his own, a blanket muffling his ability to rationalize and reason. And as suddenly as it was there, it was gone. Rostov blinked, taking breath into frozen lungs, ignoring the shiver that ran down his spine. Robed man held out a thick cream envelope, its texture ornate and rough, like the old parchment his grandmother had preferred for stationery. Rostov took it with the same silence in which it was given, a part of him relieved to see the man's breath frosting the air as his own did, proof that this was no spirit, no evil devil to steal his soul. As soon as his hand began to drop, the envelope raised to slide inside his jacket. The man was gone, the loud sound leaving ringing aftershocks in his ears. Rostov blinked, staring blankly at the empty space for a brief moment. Then he turned away, his pace casual, his thoughts idling on, eyes always aware and moving, assessing, planning. He had important information to deliver. A message was sent with one of many couriers of the last few days, and in return a package was delivered personally to Vladimir Putin containing two objects. The first item was given to the operations assembled Spetsnaz, who were informed of its function. It was an international teleportation device, what the wizards called a portkey. It would work 3 times to preset locations when given the keyword. teleporting those who used it from the Kremlin Senate to a small, unused house in London close to where their target lived on its first use. On its second, it would take them inside Russia and the Kremlin, where the wards would be lowered for the retrieval. On its third use, it would teleport directly back within the target's house if a return trip was in order. At about 14:30 Moscow time, the team teleported from one of the rooms in the east wing of the Kremlin Senate and returned 2 hours later with a young, red-haired Caucasian woman. Vladimir Putin was not there to see it. He was informed of the operation's progress while attending a meeting at another location. When it was completed, he made his way to the east wing where the woman was being held. He preferred to handle the interrogation personally. As he entered the large, lavishly decorated room, he was greeted by directors Sergun and Bortnikov, along with the team of Spetsnaz in civilian clothing. He accepted their salutes with a nod as he looked them over with cold eyes before dismissing them from the room. As the Spetsnaz left, one paused to give Putin the portkey, a small, round crystal orb delicately carved with the Russian ministry's sigil. The Russian wizards loved their elegant baubles. He absently placed the portkey in his pocket and turned to face their captive. In the middle of the room was a long wooden table with well over a dozen chairs on each side. The hound was seated in the middle of it, her hands bound, her eyes blindfolded. Putin took a seat on the opposite side of her, where a bottle of water, a pen and paper, and a single folder were placed, while Sergun moved to loosen her bonds. She didn't move, and seemed oddly calm about the whole affair, as if she was expecting it. Based on the recent disappearance of several groups of hounds the world over, she probably was. But as the blindfold was removed, it became clear that she was not expecting to come face to face with the president of the Russian Federation, along with the directors of the FSB and GRU. Her jaw dropped in shock, her green eyes grew wide, and she struggled for words. The tranquilizer effect probably also had something to do with that. Putin gave her a soothing smile while he passed the bottle of water to her. "I am told that the tranquilizers leave one thirsty. Drink," he commanded in English while flipping open the folder to skim through the gathered files. She paused at his words, looking down towards the water. He saw the longing in her eyes, but also the reluctance. With a slow motion, she reached out and tested the plastic cap, no doubt testing its seal. So she was cautious. He approved. As she finally took a drink of the water, he heard chairs creak on his left and right sides as Sergun and Bortnikov took their seats next to him. He paused another moment, letting the silence gather, and then he began to read from the papers in his hands. "Emma Noel," Putin said aloud slowly in his heavy accent. 26 years old, graduate from the London School of Economics with a minor in world history. Born 20th of January 1988, Brighton, East Sussex County, England. Parents divorced. Mother moved to Canada while father died on 10th September 2000, later moved to London with aunt from father's side. Single, no children, no boyfriend. Joined radical group, Hounds Out of London 4 years ago. As he finished, he looked up into her eyes. She had begun to scowl, bravado etched into her pale features. "We are not radicals. We just want answers," she protested. "Answers that you and every government has hidden from us." Her voice was weak but defiant. Beside him, Sergun snorted before barking out a reply. "Miss Noel, your organization risks creating a worldwide political crisis." Sergun's voice was thick and his English broken. "Exposure of the magical world as you are seeking will bring about massive riots in your own country and also across every major democratic state. Then they shouldn't have hidden secrets from their own citizens." Noel spat back with acidic derision. "They shouldn't have worked to help kidnappers and murderers that hide in the shadows, removing the very memories of any who come close to finding the truth. They destroy the lives of their own people for that secrecy, and no one holds them accountable." Her voice raised at the last, full of conviction, her fear beginning to fade as anger took hold. Igor's voice was venomous as he replied to her accusation. "Do you have any idea as to the gravity of your actions? Governments will fall because of this. Thousands will be hurt and potentially killed, while millions of lives will be at risk. 4, maybe 5, nuclear powers will face governmental collapses that will threaten the whole world, all because you and your band of idiots wanted answers and accountability." Radical is too kind a word for the death and destruction your actions will. Igor. Putin's voice was cold as ice, and the director of the GRU went immediately silent. Miss Noel, however, took the opportunity to snipe back. Her nostrils flared as her lips twisted in disgust. What do you lot care about lives? I know all about Russia. You play with lives as if they are toys, as you did in Chechnya, Georgia, and now Ukraine. The anger in her voice was cold now, no longer heated as her voice lowered. You accuse my group of endangering millions, but we are not the ones who have the blood of hundreds of children on our hands. She looked at Bortnikov meaningfully. Or the deaths of hundreds in a pointless civil war. Her gaze turned to Sergan. Nor did we wage a costly war that killed tens of thousands for the sake of an election. Her eyes turned to Putin. I know the wizards must have helped you get me here, which is no surprise to me since you deserve each other. Putin leaned back in his chair and simply stared back at her. There was no anger or hatred in his gaze, simply a cold stare. Precious minutes passed as the anger slowly faded from her gaze until only fear remained. She began to fidget, her mouth open to speak before it closed again. It was when she turned eyes down, breaking his gaze, that he leaned forward and with one hand lifted her chin so their eyes met again. You feel your conviction very strongly. Tell me, Miss Noel, what did these wizards do to hurt you? His voice was soft, a whisper and nearly kind, though none of the emotion was reflected in his eyes. How did they hurt you? There was another long moment of silence as he dropped his hand. He could see the gears turning in her mind as her eyes flickered, weighing the advantages and disadvantages of telling him her story, trying to decide if the information mattered and should be kept secret. And he saw her desire to condemn the wizards overcome her caution. When the words came, she spoke slowly, barely audible, her voice a mere whisper as she told of a young girl's horror and the loss of one much beloved. Emma Noel loved her father. It was not just the love of any girl for the man who nurtured and protected her. It was respect as well, and pride. He had been former SAS, had served in the Gulf War with distinction. He was a hero. All the teachers had said so. All her friends knew it. Emma hated her mother for leaving them, hated her for being so selfish as to not understand and leave when her father returned from active duty a colder man, harsh with words and actions. But to Emma, he had always been kind and gentle. He called her his dove, would tousle her long red hair with a soft smile every night before bed. Emma would not leave him to go with her mother. She fought every inch of the way, and when forced, would run away and back to the small house he owned. Eventually, her mother stopped making her leave, and so Emma stayed. He was her entire world at 13. She did not rebel when he asked her to do something for him. He was always so reasonable, so understanding. He was her hero. He would always be there for her, would always protect her. So when she woke in the middle of the night to flashing lights and a single loud scream, it was for him she cried. Daddy, 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 daddy. He came into her room in a hurry, dressed only in jeans and a stained t-shirt, obviously disheveled from having thrown on clothes in a hurry. Don't worry, honey, shhhhh, calm down for me, okay? His voice was low and calm. I want you to go to our secret place, you remember? Remember what I told you to do? Some called her father paranoid. Some whispered that the war had changed him, damaged him. But Emma knew her dad was just prepared for anything, including strangers in robes throwing balls of colored light. And she knew exactly where her dad wanted her to go. It was their safe room, their secret place. A certain panel in the second bedroom's ceiling that, when touched in the right place, would slide aside. A loop of rope would slide down a ladder, and she could just reach the panel when she stood on top of the bed. She knew because her dad had made her practice, again and again, until she could pull down the ladder and climb safely inside in only a matter of minutes. Emma nodded at her father, and with his hand at her back, quickly slid from bed and ran to the other bedroom. When she was safe inside a small compartment hidden from the rest of the attic, she looked out the small holes between the attic's boarded-up window. The men outside wore black robes, white masks over their faces like something she had seen during Halloween. They held long sticks in their hands, pieces of wood that cast out odd light. In one's hands, Mrs. Henton kicked and screamed, her flowered nightgown a spot of color amongst the dark-robed figures. One held his stick to her throat, the others laughed, a loud raw sound of glee that made her skin crawl. She heard weeping and smelt smoke. The Henton house 2 doors down was on fire. Watch her bawling, like the bitch she is, a man called, his voice echoing down the street. Emma watched as the one who spoke stepped from the shadows of another house, his stick held aloft towards the woman. Let me at her, Rosia. You always have all the fun. Emma could see his silver mask in the light from the street lamps. She would always remember that gleaming silver skull, a gaping black hole where his mouth would be. It looked like it was constantly grinning, a monster ready to eat you whole. And then she heard a loud pop, what she would later learn to be the signature sound of a SAR 80, her father's rifle, one that he had purchased in secret and hidden away following his service. And the silver mask exploded into liquid red shards. Her mind refused to believe it at first. She wondered what had happened, why the mask was gone, why the figure dropped to the ground with a sick gurgle. Before she could do more than gasp, she saw her father stride out from below her, his tousled brown hair marking him in the night. Release her now. The cops are on their way. Her father's voice was firm, in control. Emma felt relief rush over her in equal measure with terror for her dad. Mrs. Henton was still screaming, and Emma recognized words in it now, an endless stream of them. They killed them. They killed them. My God, they killed them. Oh God, oh God. The robed figures were facing her father now. Their silver masks are motionless and cold. The one on the right lifted its stick. Her father shot again, the rifle on his shoulder thumping out the popping sound, and the figure fell. And Emma heard a laugh then, high-pitched and filled with thrilled wonder. The one holding Mrs. Henton spoke as the laughter died, and she knew it was the one who had laughed. The dog still can bite, eh not? The fourth and last figure nodded its head. Neither moved. Again her father spoke. Stand down now, let her go. Again that cold laughter, a mad cackle. And suddenly Mrs. Henton was flung to the side, and the middle figure lifted its stick towards her father. She could not comprehend what happened next. Her father's gun fired, but the figure did not fall. A sheet of light was in front of it, protecting it, and when it fell, more light came forth. She saw her father move, duck, and roll, but the fourth figure had also thrown light, and this time her father screamed. She would never forget those screams, never forget seeing her father fall and cry and writhe. Her fingers ached where they clenched, her nails tore the skin of her palms. She looked away. She hid her face in her knees, curled tight on the floor, unable to watch, unable to look. The screams continued, soon joined by a more feminine lilt, and over it all the cold laughter rose and fell, the sounds mixed together in her mind, deep sorrow and fear and joy. When the world was silent again, her ears still rang with horror. Others came after the black-robed ones left, wearing red. They went into every house, even mine. I heard them moving around downstairs. After them, the cops came. I went down then. But no one believed me when I told them what I saw. They said the Hentons' house caught fire, and my dad tried to enter it to get them out and died. Both Mr. and Miss Henton, their two kids who were a little older than me, and my dad. I kept thinking someone else must have seen, must have. I thought maybe they were lying. They were too afraid to say anything. Later, after I joined the hounds, it became clear. They really didn't remember. Emma Noel's voice slowly died as her account ended. Her green eyes were focused on the wooden table, filled with remembered sorrow. When they finally lifted, they were once again firm and unyielding. The wizards are monsters. None of us knew about some freak wizards' war. None of us knew we were in danger, would even need to be prepared for attack. My father could have lived if he had known. The Hentons could have lived. It all could have been different. Putin smiled slightly, leaning forward. So you want revenge, then? He asked softly. To bring pain to those who caused you pain. Miss Noel lifted her chin, lips pressed firmly together before she spat out her answer. No, I want the truth. The real truth, not some pages from a stolen book by the hounds. Not some old newspaper article that we found with pure luck. I want the real story, and not just for myself, but for the hundreds of others that might have died in that magical war that we had no clue was even happening. I want what happened to my father to not happen to anyone else's father because of simple ignorance. She took a breath before she continued, eyes narrowed. That list of missing children on our website is not false. Hundreds of them over the years, kidnapped from our world and forced into theirs, only to be persecuted for their blood and forced to comply or face the punishment of memory charms themselves. Putin sighed, letting himself glance to the side, giving the impression of reluctant agreement. It may be so. he said in a quiet voice. But my colleague here is not wrong about the consequences of exposure. It would be disastrous, and may not even lead to your desired conclusion, at least if handled as it has been so far. Besides, can you claim that all the hounds are so altruistic as you are in their motives? He took out a different file from the folder and passed it along the table towards her. Your leader, this James, seems to be driven by revenge, even if you are not. She folded her arms, head lifted high as she met their gazes with a fervent gaze. She barely glanced at the photo clipped to the file on the table. James told us all his story. What happened to his brother was horrible, and it led him to the hounds. But it is not the only reason we are doing this. The people deserve the truth. She paused, each word biting as she spoke them. I will not betray the hounds to you. I would not do so for Britain, let alone a tyrannical government like yours. I will never willingly help you protect the wizards from exposure. At this, Bortnikov spoke for the first time, his Russian accent heavy in the few words he said. We can make you willing with time, Miss Noel, as long as it takes. The woman, already white, paled further, but her chin remained stubborn and her gaze direct. She said nothing in return, only looked back at them with defiant eyes. Putin leaned back in his chair, glancing towards the men at his side. He could leave, let the FSB and Gru torture the girl until she broke, or he could take a small risk and learn what she knew here and now. Everything was a risk in the game he played. Trusting information gained under pain could also be a risk. Waiting for her to break would be as well. He weighed his options, eyes cold, and then he made his decision. Putin let a small smile twist his mouth, softening his features in a minute way. We never said we wished to protect the wizards from exposure. He saw the confusion appear on her face, a crack in her facade of bravery. The only thing we want is for it to be done without risking a global crisis of uncontainable proportions. We want to be prepared. Her green eyes narrowed at him as she spoke. Why should I believe you? You send your Spetsnaz to my house, kidnap me in the middle of the day, bring me here using some magical device, and expect me to believe you don't want to protect them when you already know of their kind, their crimes, and have done nothing to prevent or stop them. Her voice rose in disbelief, then she shook her head with a scoffing gesture of her hand. Putin did not allow his annoyance to show. He only continued to smile. Yes, I know of the wizards. I have worked with them throughout my political career, but I am neither their servant nor their ally. He sighed in a put-upon manner. Believe what you will about my actions, Miss Noel, but my intentions have always been to strengthen Russia, regardless of the cost. The wizards are but another tool to me. Her gaze flickered in increased confusion, even as her eyes narrowed. What do you want from me? I will never betray any of them. Putin lifted one hand in a nonchalant gesture. Only two things, Miss Noel. The first, how the hounds expect to resist the wizards when they finally decide to do away with the lot of you. She narrowed her eyes. And the second, Putin smiled again. A small thing only. I would ask you to deliver a message to this James when you see him again. Her mouth tightened. He could see her weighing the options, the fierce struggle in her body language. On one hand, the young British woman had been told that Putin was the devil himself. A brutal dictator who had no qualms about imprisoning those who opposed him, who assassinated deserters, who outright destroyed any hope the LGBT movement might have had in Russia, who had waged two brutal wars in Chechnya and Georgia and had started another in Ukraine. Regardless of how smart a person was, it was hard to throw away years of propaganda, especially when a great deal of it was true no matter how exaggerated it might be. On the other hand, there was that young idealistic girl who had seen her childhood shattered by the brutal death of her father one night. The girl who had sought to right the wrongs of the world, who wanted justice for the crimes the wizards had committed. He saw the girl win out, the emotion twist her feelings. He supposed she probably excused it to herself, told herself she was giving no true information away, not anything he could use to stop them. What harm, after all, was there in delivering a simple message? What harm in bragging about how they would persevere against the wizards? Putin gestured towards Sergun as she slowly nodded, seeing the man pull out a notepad. He leaned back in his chair. She began to speak in halting words, reluctance still in her voice and manner. He crossed his arms as she spoke, the speed of her words increasing as she began to get excited, as she described parts of a plan she had only been on the bare edges of. It was a grunt only when it came to the hounds. An idyllic woman used to spread their own propaganda, a simple monitor of computer forums and online data. But she had heard the rumors from others, had passed messages between branches using digital means. She knew some of the code, had deciphered it on her own from simple curiosity and boredom. She knew of something called pub. She knew it was some sort of refined chemical or element and was supposedly able to resist the effects of magic. She did not know if it was a weapon or a defense or how it was meant to be used. Those secrets were kept from her, but she knew that its existence had been shared to gain access to the photos that were shared on the Proof website, and she knew James had traveled to New York to make the switch. Putin smiled genuinely for the first time in the hour he had spent with the woman. He saw her eyes flicker away from him, her fists clench. He knew she was suddenly doubting the wisdom of sharing such information with him. He gave her no time to think on it further. He reached in his pocket and withdrew the globe, placing it softly on the wooden table. We all thank you, Russia, thanks you, Ms. Noel, for your cooperation. You can rest assured in the knowledge that what you have told us today will help in your quest to expose the magicians among us. Now, regarding this message. She looked up and then away, her fingers agitated as they plucked absently at the edge of the table. I may not be able to contact him directly. He's somewhere else now. But I might be able to get into contact with someone who can contact him if Me5 hasn't got them by then. Putin sighed. Your best effort will do. But Emma, my dear, I'm afraid there is something else you must do as well. At his cue, Sergen placed a small vial upon the table. It was the second item he had asked for from the Russian ministry. A diluted memory potion meant to erase all events of the last 12 hours from the drinker's mind. Its clear liquid seemed to move in the light, flecks of some green substance gleaming within. You see, we cannot simply let you leave here, knowing what you do about us. As we lack the wizard's unique ability to cast binding oaths, this must do. He gestured to the vial, saw her distrusting eyes follow it. A simple potion, one of theirs that we have acquired. It is painless and will remove any memory you have of these events, for our protection and your own, of course. She looked down at it and he saw the fear there. When she looked back at them, betrayal ran across her features. You won't let me leave here without it. It wasn't a question, but Putin nodded anyway in response, his features still arrayed in kindness. She closed her eyes. Then, with slumped shoulders, she reached for the vial. He had her write a letter to herself, giving directions to pass the sealed message on to James by whatever means necessary. The envelope contained only a USB stick, and the envelope was spelled to only open to John Frederick's hands. Inside the flash drive was written a message, alongside a series of directions. There might have been another way to get the man a message, but this one he hoped to be the most expedient and gave great promise of success. He hoped James would read and accept. When Miss Noel, unconscious and quiet, was transported back to Britain with the envelope and her own letter tucked safely in her pocket, Putin sat quietly as the others went into motion. Bortnikov left the room quickly to give orders, to meet his trusted agents and prepare. Igor Sergan remained seated but fidgeted, toying with his pen and looking at his notes. I don't like this, Sergan finally muttered. Noel is a gamble, and even if she succeeds that James' character is a radical in the truest sense of the word, we can't control either of them. Putin acknowledged this point, but continued. True, but we don't need to control any of the hounds, just guide them in the direction we want them to go. Have them provide us a date for when the exposure will happen. He rubbed his chin, staring across the room at the many portraits adorning the wall. If you have an alternative plan, then give it. Igor was silent for a moment, before looking down at the notes before him. We have more than enough information, Vladimir. Find the British hounds and eliminate them along with the rest of the ones in our own country, either ourselves or by giving NATO the information it needs to do so. If this James agrees to meet us, then it would be the perfect opportunity to take him out as well. We can then release the truth in a few years, as we originally planned alongside the Chinese. Sergan paused, as if reluctant to continue. Putin impatiently gestured for the man to continue, and he did so. Should this fail, then contact the Russian ministry and tell them the whole story. The Chinese can't do it due to their own war with the Oriental Ministry, but within the Iqua, our own have a great deal of influence. Enough to make the other European ministries take real action, to assemble a large international strike force to take out the British hounds with extreme prejudice. The wizards have the ability to travel nearly everywhere instantaneously. We can provide the necessary intelligence for them to succeed. A courier could go out tonight to inform them. Putin grimaced while he considered the plan, its merits and flaws. He did not like the idea of involving the wizards as assassins at this point, not while he did not have more control over them. It risked setting loose a tide that could not be stopped, and the Iqua was not a foolish organization in itself. Commission existed to monitor individual ministries and report any attempt of a ministry to breach the statute of secrecy. If it was known that the Russian ministry worked with its corresponding muggle government in such a way, breaking the statute, the retaliation would be brutal. It had been attempted before. Most recently, a wizard called Grindelwald had tried to make magic known in order to gain control of the muggle population, mainly by infiltrating and using the German Ministry of Magic. He had done his best to keep his actions quiet, but the Iqua had found out before the wizard had complete control of the country. In response, the Russian ministry of the time, the Oriental ministry, along with the British and French ministries, had rushed to do battle with him, jointly amassing a force of over 1,000 wizards. Grindelwald's forces had managed to keep them at bay for several years, until Albus Dumbledore finally dueled and defeated Grindelwald himself, allowing the Iqua to crush the German wizards and their sympathizers in a series of pitched battles. As far as Putin knew, courtesy of his magical counterpart, the North American Bureau and Oriental Ministry believed their secrets to be safe. But investigations were well underway into American wizard-muggle contacts and the Orient's loss of China. Some point the truth would come out, and when it did, war would begin anew and it would be brutal. He hoped to make his move before that took place. He needed the Chinese on his side, and if what he suspected about America was true, they may also take his side regarding revealing the wizard's presence. He needed the combined strength, not just of military power, but of magical strength, if the Iqua was to be forcibly disbanded. At that last thought, Putin looked back to Sergan and shook his head. No. There is the risk that other hound groups could be destroyed, especially the American branch, which hold this information we must find. The Chinese are already preparing to wage war on the Oriental Ministry and the Iqua, and they would not be pleased with us if we endangered their plans. He held out his hand to end the protests before they began. We don't owe them anything, but their economic support is useful at this juncture, considering the West's recent stance against Russia. We will help them as promised. As you wish, Mr. President. With that, the head of GRU went to complete his assigned tasks, taking the hound folder with him and leaving Putin alone to his thoughts. It was all interconnected, each government and its response connected to another. Inside his mind, he saw a map of the world, separated into overlapping quadrants. It all, perhaps, would have been simpler if the magical ministries echoed their normal brethren. But often the lines of influence overlapped. The Oriental Ministry of Magic, for instance, was spread around all of southern Asia, from Pakistan to Japan. Its main location was within Singapore, a place China could not move an army against without sparking World War III, not unless the world knew why. China's success would be tied heavily to that of Russia, and if they could gain American support as well, then the Hound's escalation of events could work into their favor. Putin stood and mentally laid his plans aside. Nothing was certain, not now, and would not be for some time. It was a constant calculation, the running of a government, the strategy for war. Always changing, always fluid, like water running down a hill, only able to be diverted with careful plans and guesses at the terrain ahead. But if he had excelled at anything in his life, it was in doing calculations. The room was small, but not crowded. Within, two factions squared off across from each other at a low oval table, a low murmur of voices washing over to where Aguo stood, his back straight as he held himself with quiet alertness. His wand was not on his person. Minister Zheng Huicheng, the man whose orders he followed and person he protected, had explained the necessity an hour before. President Jinping does not wish to project anxious feelings to the Russian president. Putin is aware of our Shushi guards, but outright flaunting of them would be dishonorable and may give the wrong impression. So, Aguo had given up his wand and wore muggle clothes with short sleeves, his forearms obviously bare for all to see. Of course, his wand was a mere formality. He had been trained by his father in both magical and muggle means of combat, and hand-picked by the Ministry of State Security to protect its minister as his personal bodyguard at all times. Aguo lived in the minister's house. He attended every conference, every meal, every private meeting. Only President Xi Jinping was better protected in the People's Republic of China. They never knew when the dishonorable Oriental Ministry would launch another strike. Of the Shu-Shi who remained in China, all worked under the watchful eyes of the Republic. They raised their families in the highly warded temples in which they had hidden from the Oriental Ministry for generations. But when their sons and daughters were trained and ready, they were assigned to work for and within the Ministry of State Security, each holding a unique and vital position. There were teams of law enforcement, trained for combat. There were teams whose main focus was magical transportation. There were Shu-Shi who spied, who recruited other Shu-Shi from within foreign ministries, extending welcome to all who wished to live in freedom from Western tyranny. Aguo listened to the words exchanged in the meeting without expression. This meeting had been last minute, the location exchanged only minutes before the meeting took place. Aguo had transported the minister inside the chosen building directly. The anti-apparition wards lifted for the occasion for exactly 3 minutes, enough time for an advance team to teleport ahead and check the arrival destination and send confirmation back. Inside the room, only Minister Huicheng and Aguo represented China. Across from the minster, 3 muggle men sat, each one focused on Huicheng. Russia had not insisted a bodyguard be present within the room. But then, Aguo figured each of the men were more than dangerous enough by themselves. On the right was Alexander Bortnikov, the director of Russia's Federal Security Service. On the left, Lieutenant General Igor Sergan, the director of their main intelligence directorate. And between them, his blue eyes hawk-like in their intensity, sat President Vladimir Putin. We calculate 4 main sects existed within the Kremlin, each week with only a few members. 2 of these have been disbanded. The other 2 remain so that we may monitor them. The president spoke, answering the query from Minister Huicheng. The minister nodded. Aguo's eyes locked with those of the president for a mere moment before their blue gaze flickered away. Aguo felt his body tense, his power responding to a moment of fear before he consciously made himself, and it relax. They were allies, if uneasy ones at times, a fact Aguo was grateful for. He preferred to have fearsome people on his side, rather than arrayed against him. The men in the room continued to confer, sharing statistics carefully picked for release, and comparing strategies to deal with possible uprisings. Aguo could not help but notice that neither group seemed particularly concerned with the Shu-Shi's existence being revealed, but only with what was to be done after it took place. He had attended enough meetings, heard enough things, to know what this might mean. He did not know the situation in Russia, but in China, the silent war between Shu-Shi factions was at a standstill, the Oriental Ministry and the State Security Ministry constantly attempting to undermine one another. If all of China knew of Shu-Shi, the tide would be turned, and the advantage would fall on the side of the Republic. The People's Liberation Army, with the ability to fight in the open, could eradicate the Oriental Ministry once and for all, as it had nearly done under Mao 50 years before. Aguo felt excitement begin to stir within him. Surely their Muggle citizens would be relieved to know that the government had already faced the menace of foreign Shu-Shi and their corruption. Surely, if they knew the true history of China, of the noble sorcerers and wizards who fought for emperors in China through the millennia, they would rejoice to have such power on their side. They would know the Republic was strong, the people were strong. They were all Chinese, all equal, Shu-Shi and Muggle alike, none greater than the other, but strong together. Aguo felt his fingers twitch at the thoughts racing through his mind, connections made from years of protecting the minister, of the many sentences he had heard but not understood, the meetings with key personnel, the preparations. President Putin softly spoke, and as Aguo heard his words, his body stilled. Russia is ready to stand with China if these events come to pass. In his excitement, Aguo had missed the comment made by his minister. But he could not possibly mistake the undertone, the body language in the room, the certainty. There had been no discussion of eradicating the hound sect, only of controlling them, leading them, monitoring them. Only of strategy should their mission be completed. China was not alone in their readiness to bring the news to their people. Russia was also poised for action. Aguo was not an expert at politics. He knew only what he learned from observation, from watching the elaborate dance of information and suggestion and threat. But he knew that nothing was ever done if it was not for gain. There would be power and strength in assimilating the magical populace within the Muggle government, as China had begun to do. And being ahead of the rest of the world to do so would bring great strength. His lip twitched in a small smile, and once more he caught the eyes of the Russian president. Aguo's smile faded. As the gaze held, a picture formed, unconsciously taken, as if thrust forward towards him with purpose. He found himself looking away to the side. His heart beat faster. He was aware of the men talking again, promises and invitations, the political dance ever moving between them in every word and action and gesture. Suddenly, he was not quite so eager, and inside his mind, he still saw the fractured image of a world preparing for war. It was a formality, but a necessary one. Weeks after the proof website went online, the powerful of the world met together. It wasn't in person, of course. There were too many of them, and the risk of having them all in one place too great. And all involved knew that the purpose of the meeting was not to inform the others of the hound's presence, or even to come to a polite consensus of what to do about them. They all knew that the first was already known, and the second would never happen. Instead, it was to look into each other's eyes and know where everyone stood. The video conference was highly encrypted, both the sending and receiving sides. The location where each country streamed from was also secured, and the date and time given classified. 7 countries attended the first conference. Each would be responsible for informing, or not informing, the lesser countries around them that did not possess the intelligence potential or manpower of the first. There was Russia and their 2 main intelligence agencies, the FSB and GRU. Then China with its MSS, and Germany's BND. France and its DGSE and DCRI, then the Rux Me-6 and Me-5, both on the defensive. And last, the United States' CIA and NSA, followed by Israel's Mossad and Shin Bet. None expressed surprise at the existence of magical beings and governments. There was no question of the statute of secrecy and its legality, or the possible retaliation from the International Confederation of Wizards. Knowledge of known hound numbers was shared, a joint database created. There was discussion, briefly, of attempting contact with the Iqua, but this notion from France was quickly dismissed. China hinted that the time might be coming to tear the veil that was hiding the wizarding world from the normal one. Russia expressed its dislike for other governments within its own borders. The United Kingdom defended its ignorance of the Hound Group due to its focus on the increased threat from Islamic terrorists. Israel expressed its disgust in both notions and vehemently blamed all European countries for ignoring both threats until it was nearly too late to stop them. The United States agreed with China, a fact that created vehement argument between Germany and France with the 2 countries. The world is too unstable. The stress from such a revelation would throw us all into disarray. France claimed, the UK and Germany nodding along. Russia snidely hinted that France was the weakest of them all, and that others would fare far better, if not thrive. None missed that clear factions were being taken, lines drawn in the sand, and all prepared for the possibility that brewing around them was the perfect storm for another Cold War the world over, one that might last only hours or mere days. And all knew that if only one among them decided to burst the seal on the wizard's secret, none of the others could stop them. None could possibly prevent the information from leaking to every citizen with access to the internet, not for long, not forever. The hounds had made every country aware of how thin the shield was from the knowledge. The hounds had made every country aware of both the benefits and the downsides to such knowledge being known. And suddenly it was made plain that the hounds were only the sparks of a far larger fire, one that had been burning underground for years, decades, a century among the governments of the world. The hounds could be stamped out, but the fire would continue to simmer until it met dry tinder again and burst into flame to be battled once more. And those who battled the firestorm were no longer quite so willing to do so. So when the conference ended, the cameras were disabled and the computers shut down. Every country made its plans and chose its allies with careful intent. And the world hung on a single, fragile thread. To be continued. The Triwizard Tournament, tilde tilde asterisk tilde review please. Tilde asterisk tilde.